So a little bit ago, I received the Meze 99 Classics, and this is the walnut version and with the gold trim. There's a bunch of different colors and configurations you can get, and this is I believe this is the 2017, 2018 version with, from what I imagine is the new pads, which there is some controversy about, but we'll get to that in a bit. These go for about $310 American. I think you can get them for about 400 Canadian, and possibly somewhere on sale, but I haven't seen that locally. So I want to go over a bunch of things with this, and we'll get into some comparisons. But this is a really unique headphone, and it's definitely not going to appeal to everybody, and certainly there are some people who really won't be into it, but there's also a large group of people who I think will really like it, and there's also something really cool with what you can potentially do with this, which we will talk about. But to start off, I'm going to kind of show you the presentation here a little bit. When you look at pictures of this, it looks maybe a little bit more intense than it actually is in person. And I think part of it has to do with which type you get, which version you get. The gold personally isn't something that I'm immediately drawn to. It's not something that I want. However, with the walnut version, even though the gold is a bit shinier and sticks out a bit, it's the walnut version makes it so there's not as much of a contrast, and it doesn't feel quite as gaudy or kitsch looking. So I feel like it actually it does look a little bit more, as the name suggests, classic. And you can, if the gold really isn't for you, there are silver versions available. There's one that's, I think, has like white pads or something. But personally, I really like the way that the wood and the black contrasts. So that's really nice. As far as the build quality goes, this, when you first take this out of the box and you put it in your hands, it feels really light, and that makes it feel almost like cheap. But it's not, because there is a really good construction to this, and it's a very simple design, more simple than it looks, and we'll get into that a little bit. But the one thing I would say is that it's not something you just want to like throw in your backpack. You want to use the case that it comes with, and just because of one mechanism here, which I love, and I'll show it off here a little bit. There's, if you see me moving it like this a little bit, if you can see that, the cup, it's on a bit of almost like a rubber kind of housing that makes it kind of float a little bit. And this conforms really nicely to where your ear sits, or to where it sits on your ear. I really like that. And that's something that one of my other favorite headphones, the Night Owl, has as well. And for ergonomics, this is something that I think more companies should adopt, this kind of rubberized or free floating mechanism. And that's something, the reason I mentioned is because, not just for comfort, but I would not want to throw this around because I wouldn't want to damage this piece here. And of course you don't want to damage the wood. So it's not like an M50 where you can just sort of chuck in your backpack and go. However, it is also portable, and the cup size and the weight and the shape and everything kind of lends itself to that. Comfort on this is, I would say, beyond average. Like it's definitely one of the more comfortable headphones, and the reason for that is because of this little rubber free floating mechanism here, and the headband, which has an elastic, which makes it so that you can wear this for long hours, 8 hours plus. I had no problem with that, which, if any of you guys have seen my other reviews, you know that I am a comfort freak, and I absolutely love it when headphones have this kind of elastic design for the headband, because you don't have any wear or pressure on the top of your head that makes it uncomfortable, and that makes it so that long listening sessions are actually possible with this. Whereas with other headphones that have a single headpiece design, I would say long listening sessions are not possible, or not as enjoyable, because you're distracted by pressure that you feel. And as a result, also the clamping force here, it doesn't need to be all that tight, just because of the fact that it has this design. So these will fit snugly against your head. When you first put these on, it immediately feels very full, very lush. Somebody has described this as luxurious. I think that's appropriate. But then when you sit down and do a little bit more critical listening, you realize it's because there's so much bass. Now the bass is good. Reaches really low, and it's, as far as I can tell, there's no noticeable distortion, and you can hear the tones really well. But it's, in my opinion, just a bit too big. And I wouldn't say it's loose. It's actually it's right in the middle between loose and tight, I'd say. So it's not like if you heard the Night Owl just has a bloom and it kind of just takes over everything. This is a bit tighter than that. But it's still a bit emphasized, or substantially emphasized. So bass heads might be into this kind of thing. For me personally, it's just a bit much. When I go into the mid-range, the mid-range is my favorite part of these headphones. It sounds still quite lush and full. It's not, it doesn't sound recessed at all, even though the bass is stronger. And then into the high frequencies, it's maybe not quite as resolving as some of the other headphones, but as a result, there's absolutely no sibilance. And I love that, because it's completely unfatiguing. You don't, there's no pain points when you're listening to something like Patricia Barber or poorly mastered recordings that don't have a de-esser thrown on top or anything like that. And so you can listen to a wide range of music without getting fatigued. Now, even though it's maybe not at the most resolving in the high frequencies, it is certainly throughout the rest of it very cohesive, and you don't feel like you're missing out on anything in particular. But I will say that one of the strengths of this headphone is actually the micro detail. And that's partially because of how good the soundstage is on this, especially for the mids and the highs. The soundstage for the low end tends to come a little bit close to you. So it feels like, rather than being here, it's maybe here. Whereas for the mid-range and the treble frequencies, sits a bit further away from you. And the imaging is also excellent. But as a result of the mid-range and the higher frequencies sitting a bit further away from you, you do, and also being very wide and having good depth as well, you do hear all those little details in the mix that actually probably more of those details than you would in many other headphones. So things like chairs creaking, or little bits of breathing here and there when you hear a guitar player playing, or you hear the keys or something like that. So the pedals. So it does very well for picking up all those little tiny things. And I was very impressed with that, the micro detail of that. Macro dynamics, on the other hand, it's not lacking in any of that. It's just nothing that's gonna wow you. You're not gonna go, whoa, the slam on this, or the heft of even the bass. It's not something that jumps out at you, but it's not something really to complain about. So, and it's probably better than many of the other headphones in this category, and we'll do comparisons later. But for the meantime, I do want to mention, when it comes to sound, that the type of pads that you use will change the sound considerably. And you can also do some EQ, and this is okay with EQ, but I think you don't really want to EQ things if you don't have to. And I think one of the ways to affect the sound without doing the EQ is to go with different types of pads. And I'll show you what that looks like with the different types of pads, and I'll talk a bit about how that changes the sound. But for example, I tried a few different pads on here, and the one I preferred was actually one of the this is the Brainwaves sheepskin, but that's partially also because I just had that lying around, and I think it's overall too big and not the perfect fit. But it does make it so the bass is not as intense, and it makes it so that some of those other really nice properties of the headphone, like the mids and the highs and the soundstage, come through a little bit better, and you're able to, if you're not a bass head, enjoy it a little bit more. So actually, let's before we get into some of the pad swaps I've done, I'll talk a bit about the comparisons or the other headphones that are kind of in this price range. So if you're looking at the price range of about $310 and you're looking for a closed back headphone that's somewhat portable and light, something else to consider is the MSR7 from Audio-Technica. And that one, so this is way more comfortable than that one. This one has much more bass than that one. Some people, I think, if you're doing an A and B comparison and you like a lot more bass, you will prefer this one, just hands down, because that one is very neutral. So if you're like an audio pro and you want to go out and record stuff, like I do sometimes, and by that I mean like outside and recording like in the field, that one is probably a bit better for you because it is more neutral. Whereas this one, it's the kind of thing where if you're just on the go wanting to listen to music, you might enjoy this more, especially if you're a bass head. Next on my list is the Sennheiser 598. Now that's quite a bit cheaper than this. It's less than half the price even. Again, this is more comfortable. It's hands down more comfortable. So if you're looking for that long session of listening, or whether you're gaming or something like that, this might be the better headphone to go with. That one is also probably a bit more neutral, and I think I probably prefer the tonality of that, but the soundstage on this I think is better. So it's one of those where you have to weigh your preferences. The next, I have the Bang & Olufsen H6 second generation. That headphone, I like the way that sounds, but I actually think they're very similar in their tonality. This, again, it has a bit more of the bass emphasis, but many of the other aspects of that headphone are similar with this one in terms of the sound quality. But I wouldn't even look at that one if you're in the market to spend $310 or more on a headphone. Don't go with that one. Go with this one. And the reason I say that is because this is so much more comfortable. That one has it's really light as well, which is nice. But the ear cups, the pads themselves, are very small. Like, they don't fit all over your ear. And if you're somebody who's okay with those partially on ear headphones, then you have a tougher choice to make, because that one, it's maybe not quite as bass emphasized as this is, and I think you'd probably end up enjoying the tonality of that a bit better. But if you prefer the soundstage and you want comfort, then you go with this one. So I think it really depends on what you want. The Sennheiser HD1, I don't remember, there's so many different versions of that one. I don't remember which one that I was comparing with, but it's actually my brother has one, and I was disappointed with that one, to be honest. And I preferred this. This just had this was much more immersive, and it felt more alive. Even though, again, that one is probably a bit more neutral than this one. This one has, it's just the bass about it that I'm on the fence about. Then once you're going a little bit higher in price, you have the Fostex THX00 from Massdrop, which is also the 610. But it's one of those in that price range. I don't know exactly if it's the 610. But you're looking at about $450 for one of those. So you're going up 150 roughly. 140. That is the better headphone for sure. But if you don't want to spend that much and you want to get a similar kind of bass heavy can, then definitely consider this one. But if you have the extra $150 to spend, I would probably get that. That one is not as portable. This is more portable, and this is also more comfortable. And then once you get up in price a little bit, right around maybe $700, $800, you're looking at the Night Owl, and then eventually the Aeon closed. And in my opinion, those headphones are just categorically superior. However, if I'm comparing this to the Night Owl directly, because they both, the reason I would do that actually is because they both have that similar kind of comfort feel with the little rubber pieces or the free floating cup idea, as well as the elastic headband. I think that this is maybe like 90% as resolving as that one. Like, it's, if you're not a discerning listener for resolution, get this because it's less than half the price. So, if you want something that's like 90% as good with maybe a bit extra bass, get this. Then again, this has the better soundstage. So if that's one of your key reasons to buy a headphone, you probably would want to go with this. That one is much more intimate, and yeah, it's got a bit more detail and resolve to it, and the bass is tighter and punchier, but at the same time, yeah, it's twice the price, and I wouldn't say it's twice the improvement. I would say, yeah, it's closer to about 10% the improvement. And then once you get up to the Aeon Flow closed, you have a totally different sound signature. You have a much brighter, more neutral sound signature, much punchier, tighter, more detailed. And I feel like that at that range, you're now looking at some of the, high-end, top-of-the-line kind of stuff, and this just can't compete. And I don't think you would expect it to, because it's like 3 times the price. So, and it's, yeah, so if you're the kind of person who does not like those super clinical analytic headphones, and you want maybe one of those more euphonic kind of full-sounding, intimate, fully enveloping sounds, then this is probably something to consider. Now, I would not say this is a steal at $310, but it's definitely worth looking at, especially if you like the sound of a little bit of extra bass, and a nice forward mid-range with non-fatiguing highs. Then go for something like this, or at least give it a shot. So something else to keep in mind with this that I think makes it stand out is that every piece of this is removable or replaceable. So it's not like some of those headphones where if you break a piece of it or something falls off or it's just through wear or whatever that it's totally screwed. You can actually replace the parts for this, and I'm not sure what the availability is for that. That's something you might want to look into, but yeah, you can take this apart and change things out. Now, that means that you can do all kinds of really interesting mods with this as well if you wanted to. I've just left it with pad mods for now, and I'll show you what that looks like. But when you look at the assembly of this, and there's some pretty awesome pictures online of that, it's pretty cool to see how simplistic the design is, and it almost encourages you to want to play with what they've done, because the drivers for this it's actually quite good. I would say the drivers for this are as good as those of the H6 and possibly even better. It's just that the pads that they used, I think, were maybe a bit too bass boosted or emphasized, because, and we'll get to the pad swaps, when you remove the pads and put on different pads, it does tighten things up, and you get a little bit more transparent sound. What's going on here with the driver, even in the driver you can take apart the housing, and I haven't done that just because I'd rather not accidentally screw something up and rather research it first. But yeah, you can just take this piece apart and you can change damping materials. You can so there's all kinds of applications or potential that you could change with this. So what I've done here is I've swapped out the default pads, which I thought gave it maybe too much of a bass boost, and I've added the Brainwaves sheepskin pads. Now, that sounds kind of weird because these pads are also closed off, which means that there will also be more bass emphasis. However, the original pads are considerably smaller than the Brainwaves pads, so that means that overall there's more openness to the headphone when you do use something like the Brainwaves pads. And you have to be very careful with that because not all of the pads that you're going to use are the right size. So for example, I think that the Brainwaves pads are actually the wrong size. And once you start using pads that are a little too big, you do lose a little bit of the bass because it's just going into, it's going, not being directed as straightforward into your ear. It's kind of just going everywhere. So, but because there's just so much bass with these ones, I found that it's just fine with something that's a bit bigger and a bit more open. I think a more ideal solution would be to go with pads that are this size, yet have them be maybe perforated or a velour type kind of material that just curbs some of that bass emphasis, and that would go a long way. Now, to improving the sound quality, I think the Brainwaves pads are also too thick, in my opinion, for this type of headphone. Things like thickness and pad depth, like overall size, make a huge difference for something that's where the driver itself is a bit smaller. If the drivers here were maybe like 50 or 52 millimeter, like if the driver was wide enough that you were getting sound out of all of this, then these pads would probably be pretty good, and maybe even too much bass. But because they're smaller here, they're only, I should look this up, I think they're only around like 40 millimeters. These pads, so pads that are this size, are probably the way to go. So if you don't want to EQ out the bass, which you can do, and I'm sure that you could probably get a compensation profile from somebody, or check out some of the SonarWorks stuff and see if they have that yet. I don't know if they do. I don't think they do at this point, but they're planning on adding it. You can try doing mods for this headphone. You can try doing pad swapping. You can try, one of the things that I'm playing with is messing around with some of the damping material. So that I have from other headphones. That's a Mr. Speakers one. And just, these pads made it so that the bass was almost too tame. And maybe I want a little bit more bass and reduce the soundstage a bit. Trying out some of the damping might work as well to get the right tone. So I think this headphone is full of potential, especially for DIYers or modders, so people who want to get their hands dirty a little bit and do some pad swapping. It's also going to be a lot of fun for people who like a headphone with a little bit of bass emphasis or bass presence that is more than neutral. It's and especially if you listen to like electronic music and stuff like that. Now, personally, I don't. I listen to almost exclusively music with instruments. So for me, it needs to have these kinds of mods, or it needs the EQ. But I think for a lot of people, this is going to be the kind of sound signature that they're after. Anyways, let me know what you think, and let me know if you've tried out any mods or any other pads or things like that I should check out. I've tried it with these are the velour pads that come with the Nighthawk and the Night Owl, and they did not do well, but that's also because the opening is just too big, right? So keep in mind, you got to go with the right size pad, and it's a bit on the smaller side. I recently checked out that the Campfire Audio Cascade, just a very brief audition, and I'm hoping that they're gonna if there's a loaner one around, I can, or if somebody wants to send me one, I would love to do some kind of review with that. But I think the pads that they're using for that one would be awesome to try on this, because they're smaller. Yeah, they're very deep, but they are I think sheepskin as well, or lambskin, or one of those. But they're the right size, and that's the kind of thing that makes me curious. I also want to check out the Hi-Fi Man Sundara has a really cool type of material on the top of the pad. Even though it's maybe a little bit big for these, I think it would be really cool to try something like that with these. Okay, and the cops are after me, so I'm going to leave it there. Cheers, thanks for watching.